tend to be smart, they tend to be nice, they tend to be friendly, and so on. It's not necessarily the case, but physical attractiveness spills over into other social judgments. That's what the halo effect is. So the question is, what makes a face beautiful? And psychologists and the philosophers of aesthetics and other people have spent a tremendous amount of time trying to figure out exactly what it is that makes a face beautiful. They've measured things like the distance of the eyes from the chin and the top of the head, and the average distance of the eyes from each other, and the average spread of the nostrils on the nose, and all this kind of stuff. You got all these feature measurements, and yeah, you can kind of characterize an attractive face in terms of certain feature measurements. That's how plastic surgeons stay in business. You ever watch Nick Tuck on TV? You know that's exactly what they do. There are these things you have to do for your profession, right? And one of them is to watch Nick Tuck just once. Okay. If you watch it more than once, well, I don't know, but that's. But you should watch it. You should watch it at least once. But so why do these particular measurements come about? Well, that is the $6 million question in social cognition. Ellen Burscheid and Elaine Walster, the leading authorities in the entire universe on interpersonal attraction, in the very first edition of their book, some of them just have no idea. There's no answer to the question of what constitutes beauty. Well, that was true in 1974. It's not true any longer. We actually have a very good idea what constitutes beauty, at least facial beauty. And it comes from the work of Judith Langlois and her colleagues. She's a New Zealand psychologist. And basically, it turns out, somewhat paradoxically, that average faces are perceived as more attractive than non-average faces. You might think that that's counterintuitive. Well, that's the whole point of science. If you could intuit the whole thing, you wouldn't become a psych major, right? You just talk to your grandmother and get everything that you need. There are two theories about this. One is an evolutionary theory that basically says that natural selection, Darwinian natural selection, has a kind of normalizing function. The idea here is that extremes in physical appearance, if you're too tall or too short or too fat or too thin or you don't have one of your arms or something like that, these kinds of extremes are markers of genetic mutations, and they argue that mate selection prefers people with average-looking faces because average-looking faces, being very attractive, okay, are markers of robust reproductive health, okay, fecundity and all of that kind of stuff. Then there's just this prototype theory, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which basically argues that we carry around in our heads category prototypes, which are in some sense the average of all the examples of the category that we've encountered. And the closer an object appears to the category prototype, the more likely we are to perceive it as familiar, and we know that familiarity is also a major determinant of preference. So anyway, Langlois and her colleagues performed a number of very interesting studies using the computer averaging of faces. What you do is you got 100 people in this class, we take 100 full-face headshots, and then using a computer program, we kind of blend various numbers of faces together, and that's exactly what they did. Matching the location of the eye pupils and the midline of the lips, they produced composite photographs that were the average of 2 or 4 or 8 or 16 or 32 faces. Now, this is not 32 shots of the same person. This is one shot of 32 different people, all kind of glommed together using this computer averaging algorithm. Here are some examples of their stimulus materials, some men and some women. And what we've got here are composites of 4 faces, 8 faces, 16 faces in this row, and 32 faces in this row. If you just look at these for a second, okay, what you can see is that this guy really is more attractive than this guy, and this woman is more attractive than this one. Now, that's not to say that she's unattractive, okay, or for that matter that he is, but there's a general increase in attractiveness, and it comes out, in fact, in the data. Here we have the average rating of physical attractiveness for male and female targets. These are individual faces, and then composites of 2, 4, 8, 16, or 32 faces. And what you can see is that there's a progressive growth in facial attractiveness, in rated attractiveness of these faces. That 16 and 32 face composites are rated as significantly more attractive than 2 or 4 face than the composites. So again, it's just a piece of data about this question of what it is that determines the facial attractiveness. So the puzzle of facial attractiveness actually seems to be solved. Okay, 1974 there was no answer to this question. Just 15 years later, 1990, Langlois and Rogman argued that attractive faces tend to represent the central tendency or the averaged members of the whole category of faces. And again, that's an empirical fact. Okay, if you want to know what determines facial attractiveness, the answer is average faces are more attractive than non-average faces. But again, the question is why this is the case. And again, evolutionary psychology has this idea that mate selection tends to focus on people who are perceived as high in reproductive health. Males are going around looking for female partners who are going to produce lots and lots of healthy children. And they argue that what actually makes a face attractive is not averageness per se, but symmetry. Okay, average faces are by definition very symmetrical because all the asymmetries have been averaged out, and they argue that facial symmetry is a marker of health, and that the reason average faces are attractive to us is that the very fact of averaging eliminates what the evolutionary psychologists call fluctuating asymmetries. Again, fluctuating asymmetries, you got more fingers on one hand than the other, you got one arm longer than the other, you've got all these kinds of things. And the evolutionary psychologists say that these fluctuating asymmetries are markers of poor reproductive health. We try to avoid them. Now, there's something to this. If you look at something like the images of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti in ancient Egyptian actually meant perfectly beautiful woman, and you'll see that she's really quite symmetrical. Okay, now that might be art, but the idea is one of the things that made Nefertiti very beautiful is that she is symmetrical, no fluctuating asymmetries there. But by the same token, if you kind of look at the kinds of faces that people tend to perceive of as highly attractive, it's not clear that fluctuating asymmetry is necessarily a bad thing. Consider, for example, Marilyn Monroe, who in the 50s and early 60s was most American men's prototype of what an attractive woman should look like, and you can see this big fluctuating asymmetry right there. I mean, nobody would want to date somebody with a face that looked like that. That's just bad. Here, Cindy Crawford has the same problem. This big fluctuating asymmetry there that suggests that her reproductive health is not very good. So you wouldn't want to spend any time with her at all. And you could do the same thing. You could do the same thing with male pictures. I only select these because, of course, Marilyn Monroe and Cindy Crawford actually bring out the beauty mark, right? They emphasize that, right? So there's a real contradiction here between the theories of the evolutionary psychologists and common sense. Okay. I will tell you, I don't have this slide with you, but I will tell you that Langlois and her colleagues made use of data collected here at Berkeley a couple of years ago to actually run a study of the relationship between facial attractiveness and health using longitudinal data that had been collected by the late Professor Jack Block here, and they found zero correlation. Not just a little correlation, zero correlation between rated facial attractiveness and objective indices of health, whether it's reproductive health or something else. So again, I score 2 points, I suppose, against the evolutionary psychologists. But the evolutionary psychologists make a particular prediction, that what we find attractive in faces is not their averageness, but their symmetry. Because it's the symmetry of the face, the lack of fluctuating asymmetries on the face that we're really looking for. So what Gillian Rhodes and her colleagues did was a very interesting psychometric study in which she took a bunch of faces using, again, computer averaged the composites and got independent ratings of the symmetry of the faces, their pleasantness, and their attractiveness, and used both averageness, which is something you can experimentally manipulate, and symmetry, which is something that's rated, to determine what people really rely on when they rate the ratings of attractiveness. The way they did this is using the statistical methodology that some of you may not be familiar with. First, they looked at the raw correlations between averageness and symmetry and attractiveness. And then what they did was they computed something called a partial correlation. It turns out that averageness and symmetry are themselves correlated with each other, okay? Because average faces are by definition symmetrical. But you can take out the correlation between symmetry and attractiveness and find what the correlation is of averageness alone is, okay? That's what the partial correlation does. And what you can see here is these are the correlations with averageness and facial attractiveness. They're very high, okay? But when you take out symmetry, they stay very high. The correlations between symmetry and attractiveness are considerably lower. And when you take out averageness, they go even further down. Okay, so the averageness really is the determining factor here, not symmetry. Average faces are perceived as attractive, even if they're not symmetrical, or even disregarding symmetry. But symmetrical faces aren't perceived as attractive unless they're also average. So again, we actually have, for once in our lives, what looks like a solution to an age-old problem of social perception. What leads us to perceive a face, that most ubiquitous of all social stimuli? What leads us to perceive a face as attractive? First thing is averageness, and second, the relationship between averageness and attractiveness is not an artifact of symmetry. It's not a product of symmetry. The relationship between averageness and attractiveness stays very, very, very high. I mean, gee, you really would kill for correlations like this in social science, even when you factor symmetry out. So, I mean, there you go. Okay. Yes, symmetry is important. Symmetry does make a contribution, but it's not the determining contribution. Averageness is, and the attractiveness of average faces is not an artifact of symmetry. Okay. So, yes. Yeah, you can think of that. I suppose you could think of that as circular in some sense, but it's where's the template going? Does the template go to extremes? No, the template comes towards the middle. But even though the template is coming towards the middle over the course of evolutionary time or something like that, still there's wide variation. Remember that natural selection requires natural variation. There are some people who are going to be very distant from that template in one direction, and other people who are going to be very distant from that template in one direction or the other. And we're still not going to perceive those faces as all that attractive. Okay, so I think it's not exactly similar, but what we're looking at here is exactly what the mechanism is. So I mean, this is actually, I think, a surprising result. We would not ordinarily think of averageness as more attractive than non-averageness. We usually think about things that are really attractive as being distinctive in some ways, but that just turns out not to be the case. It's weird, okay? But then what is it about averageness? Is it averageness or is it something else like symmetry? It turns out to be averageness. Okay? That's just kind of the way it goes. And again, there might be some exceptions somehow, but again, we tend to like these things that kind of come together towards the middle. I suppose that's a very Aristotelian principle, right? We like the median, right? But it turns out to be true. It turns out to be true in this case. One more example. I can do this really fast, I think. One more the example from this literature is work by Leslie Zebrowitz. That is the same person as Leslie MacArthur. MacArthur was her old name. Zebrowitz is her new name. On what's known as baby-facedness. And Zebrowitz, who's one of the originators of the Gibsonian ecological perspective on social perception, has argued that baby-facedness is a universal stimulus for caretaking. That if you see an object that has the qualities that we associate with baby-facedness, we want to take care of it. We don't tend to aggress against it. We don't get angry at it. We don't do all sorts of things. And that these, again, in true Gibsonian fashion, just like there are visual cues to surprise or anger or joy or disgust or whatever, there are these visual cues to this universal stimulus of babyiness. Enlarged eyes, enlarged lips, soft chubby cheeks, fine eyebrows, a pug nose, a large cranium relative to the rest of the face, and a particular slope, the slope to the forehead. Here is comparisons across species: humans, rabbits, dogs, and birds, immature members of the species, mature members of the species. And you can see that in each case, I mean, that's a baby-faced pigeon, okay? In a way that's not a baby-faced pigeon. That's a baby-faced baby in a way that's not a baby-faced anything. And it works out for lots. The next time you adopt a kitten at the SPCA, the reason people gravitate towards kittens as opposed to adult cats is because they elicit this behavior. You can just kind of see the Gibsonian wheels turning, right? That there are these, you don't need to make any inferences. Oh, I think this would be something I'd like to take care of. You just want to take care of this thing. Okay, here are some stimulus materials used by Zebrowitz, in which these aren't computer morphed, these are drawn, where this face is very much more, the face on the left is very much more baby-faced than the one on the right. Big cranium relative to the face, okay? The eyes and the lips lower on the face, and so on. And what Zebrowitz, yes? Yes, it does exactly work that way. I'm going to show you that, okay? Because what Zebrowitz and her colleagues did was to take faces like this and have people rate these faces in terms of various kinds of psychological characteristics, okay? Here's some more profiles, baby face profile with this cranium, okay? And then over there, something else, okay? So she showed these people schematic drawings of human faces, manipulated their facial features to make them more or less baby faced or right in between. Note, and I don't want to read about this in the daily paper, okay? It's just a fact that the typical male face, the typical male face is actually more mature in these terms than the typical female face. And what she did was to make the typical male face more babyish and the typical female faces a little bit more mature. And then she had male and female subjects view these sketches and then rate impressions of personality. These are the sketches, or these are samples of the sketches, okay? So you got baby-faced, central, and mature, baby-faced, central, and mature, okay? And so you get things like ratings of power, okay? And what she found was that baby-faced males are rated lower in power than so-called mature males, and that's true for baby-faced females as well, same kind of effect. Ratings of warmth, okay? Not so much going on with the males, but here the baby-faced females are rated as more interpersonally warm, more friendly. The so-called matured, or rather maturified, I suppose, female faces rated as less warm. Ratings of masculinity, okay? Baby-faced males rated as less masculine, and so on. So again, this is information about the person that is, in one way or another, conveyed by the face. And because of these baby-faced features show a lot of continuity across the species, the idea is that we pick up this information from the stimulus. Now I'll just say to you, this does work, okay? You get Elmer Fudd, Tweety Bird, things like that, but it doesn't always work. Okay, nobody would, except his family members, I suppose, would characterize Dick Cheney as somebody who's warm and gentle and in need of caretaking. Okay, and just to put the icing on the cake, the underpants bomber from Christmas Day 2009 was invariably characterized in the newspapers as baby-faced. Okay, I could get you the sites if you want. So these are not inviolate cues, but the fact that he was characterized as baby-faced speaks to the power of the cue of baby-faced. People say, gee, he looks harmless enough. He looks innocent, but it turns out maybe he wasn't. Okay, physical features leading to impressions of personality.